federal parties, but it changes it slightly such that the federal parties are considered funding parties. So the agreement includes provisions that obligate the federal government to pay 25% of the work that needs to be conducted at Willamette Cove. And then it designates the city, the state, and the port as the performing parties. So the parties that are required to select a contractor and actually do the work that EPA has outlined in its attached statement of work. As a result, the city, state, and port will actually enter a separate agreement to divide the remaining 75% of the money that's required to do the work equally between the parties. So each party will pay 25% of the four public entities. We expect the work to take about 2 years. The total cost will be about $8.1 million. And I think we'll move a little bit into the upland work, but this in-water work will be tied somewhat with the upland work because, as you know, in order to sort of effectively clean up the in-water area, you need to make sure that the upland work is complete as well and not a continuing source of contamination. So we're working carefully to make sure that the two projects are working in concert. This agreement also, I touched on this before, requires all four public entities to pay for oversight by the tribes of the work that we're doing and oversight by the Department of Environmental Quality. So the $8.1 million includes that oversight amount as well. Okay, Jessica mentioned we've already solicited bids from contractors. We'll be back before you in October with the contract that we are offering up for your approval. Prior to that, we will finalize this agreement with EPA. We will seek Curtis's approval of that agreement with the consent of the officers, as we did with Terminal 4. Okay, so you've seen a couple of pictures of the upland. This is a nice shot that shows you sort of how inviting this beach is for folks who are approaching from the water or coming down from the land. Oops. Okay, so this is the full upland site. There are 3 parcels. The parcels are divided by historic use and tax lot. There's the central parcel there, which is the one in the middle. The port was a prior owner of that parcel, and the St. John's dry docks from 1903 to 1953. In 1901, the state of Oregon authorized the port to construct and own a dry dock on the Willamette River to support vessel repair, and we constructed a public common use shipyard in 1903 for that purpose. The St. John's dry docks, for a bit of history, they were used by the U.S. to support World Wars I, II, and also the Korean War effort. Vessels, sawmill and wood product operation. There were numerous short-term tenants with all sorts of operations and significant demolition activities. You can also see on this map the sort of hatched marks in the river. The McCormick and Baxter Superfund site is immediately upstream, and there is a cap in place that was part of that remedy for that Superfund site. And that cap was installed in 2004. And I just run through those activities to give you an idea of the historic sources of contamination at Willamette Cove. As Jessica mentioned, Metro has owned all 3 parcels since 1996. So the port and Metro and DEQ have been working with the Portland Harbor Community Coalition on community outreach. As Jessica mentioned, where we're at right now, this work I mentioned has been going on for quite a while on the upland. And like all environmental sites, the work proceeds in a manner where you characterize the contamination, you identify potential remedial solutions for that contamination, you present those to the agency, and then the agency selects the remedy that it thinks will be effective to protect human health and environmental health. In this case, we've been working under a voluntary agreement with the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. We submitted a feasibility study, which is that sort of array of cleanup options that you give to the agency to allow them to choose which one they think is the most effective. And DEQ will select that final remedy after a 60-day public comment period, which will commence later this fall. We think it'll take about 5 years to clean up the upland. It is also, strangely, an $8 million cleanup. We like parallelism, maybe. That is a little bit uncertain because we don't know what the final remedy will be yet. So as soon as we have that remedy identified, we can finalize the scope of work and get a more certain amount to share with you. That will also refine the timeline for that work. So PHCC is working specifically to provide meaningful public comment during the 60-day period. That is what the Train the Trainer program was for that Jessica mentioned, was to bring community members up to speed on the status of the cleanup and the purpose of the public comment period so that they would be able to provide the agency with valuable input that's relevant to the criteria they're considering for the selection of the remedy. This is a pretty unique opportunity and I think a great way to involve the public because it provides a leadership opportunity, and those leaders in the community can then go out and provide additional training to other members of the community that maybe otherwise wouldn't be able to access this information. Let's see. Okay. So moving forward, we anticipate finalizing the in-water agreement in the next couple of weeks, and then we will, after that, be able to select the environmental services contractor who's going to do the sampling and do the design. The work that we are required to perform under the agreement with EPA will follow the steps that are identified in EPA's record of decision, which we've talked to you about before. The agreement, as I mentioned, also allows us to integrate the upland work with the in-water work to make sure that the cleanup as a whole is effective. And this agreement also provides a commitment or requires a commitment from the public entities to continue our community engagement efforts with PHCC and other stakeholders. I wanted to just highlight again a couple of the ways that we plan to continue to work with PHCC because I think this is important work. As Jessica mentioned, PHCC will be involved in the selection panel for the RFP that is out for the environmental services contractor, which is similar to what we did with T4. It was very effective and really enlightening. I sat on that panel and learned a lot from the community member who dedicated over 40 hours of his life to this process. So it was a really meaningful contribution from the community. We are requesting that environmental services contractor meet a goal of 10% small business enterprise participation, and we've increased the evaluation of the weighting on the provider's description of their commitment to social equity. So I think these are all important ways that we've committed to involve the community in this site that is so relevant to their daily lives, whether they're walking their dogs or actually spending time camping on the beach there. So I'm going to turn it over to our colleagues Annie Von Berg, who's from the Bureau of Environmental Services at the City of Portland, and Jim McKenna from the Office of Governor Kate Brown, and they'll share a few words about their participation. Thanks very much.
Hey, good morning, Commissioners. Thanks so much for your time today. I'm Annie Von Berg. I'm the Environmental Policy Manager at the City of Portland and oversee the Portland Harbor Superfund project. I'm here today on behalf of Mayor Wheeler and Commissioner Fish that both share their gratitude for your partnership in this project and also for your continued leadership in the Portland Harbor Superfund site. So thank you so much. Let me start with saying that the city is really excited about this project. As Teresa and Jessica mentioned, we see many unique opportunities with this project. First and foremost, the opportunity to collaborate amongst many different levels of public agencies. We have federal, state, regional, and local represented here, so we're really excited to work through that. We also see this as a great opportunity to gain efficiencies while working closely with the upland site. That's not typically done with things like this, so we see that as a great opportunity. And I think most importantly, and our colleagues mentioned it a few times, is the opportunity to really bring in our community partners a lot closer into the project. So looking for local economic opportunities as a result of this work, and then also looking at opportunities to bring them in to the decision-making process in ways that we can champion community benefits site-wide. So we're excited for that. Just want to share our gratitude for all of the very awesome women working on your team. So Jessica Hamilton, Beverly Perlman, Ann Gravitt, and of course, Teresa Jacobs. So thank you so much again. This for us really demonstrates public leadership and how we can accomplish more together than we can separately. So thank you so much.
Good morning, Jim McKenna with Governor Brown's Natural Resource Office. Again, thank you for having us here today. As a former Port employee, I'm happy to be back in the building and see a lot of good familiar faces. The governor is very happy to be partnering with this project with the city and the state and the port and the federal PRPs. We feel it's imperative that the public entities express leadership on this project. Leadership is the key to success at Portland Harbor, and in particular from the public entities. As many of you are aware, Portland Harbor is considered one of, if not the most complex and challenging Superfund sites in the country, and it's going to take leadership to get a successful outcome. We appreciate the environmental stewardship that the port has exhibited throughout the years, both here at the airport through sustainability and recycling efforts, as well as the early action cleanup of Terminal 4. And the port is continuing that legacy of environmental stewardship by partnering with us here at the Willamette Cove project. We're also very excited to be engaged with the city and the port with this community benefits effort to see what type of community benefits we could bring to the community related to this cleanup. We feel that's imperative to, again, success with the project. And in general, the governor visions a future of Oregon where all Oregonians get to enjoy a clean environment and a vibrant economic future. And this is one of the many projects that's going to help us get there. So happy to be here today and happy to take any questions you may have.
And with that, any of us are happy to take any questions if there are any, or we're happy to exit stage right or stage left and shorten your meeting. So,
thanks, Jessica. I just want to say I really appreciate Port staff and Port leadership on this issue that the Commission has set as a priority for us. These historical activities on the river had a great benefit for the state from an economic development perspective historically, but now have resulted in a Superfund site at one of our what we think of as a beautiful connection in our city. So appreciate the involvement of the community here, both in terms of making sure that their comments are heard, as well as in developing what the solution is going to be here. The impacts of this activity, I think, have been disparate across our community, and so it's important to get everybody's input on that. And I really, again, want to commend Port staff for all of the work on this, which I know has been long and difficult and complicated.
thank you.
Any questions? Thank you for coming.
Madam President, I have a question. This is Commissioner McDonald.
Please go ahead.
First of all, I'd like to echo your acknowledgement. I think that's very creative, the trainer approach, and acknowledge and thank you for the inclusion of all the concerned parties. Obviously, we're coming up to some critical milestones, and I'm wondering, what are the specific challenges that we as commissioners can help you with going forward?
Sure. It's a great question, and the answer is yes. I think that, one of the things that I think that this region struggles with is a lack of awareness about what the Portland Harbor Superfund site is and how it impacts us, the impacts that the commission president was talking about the impacts from the historic contamination causing concerns for communities that are among our most vulnerable, understanding some of the background on how the state and the port and the city and other private, potentially responsible parties have profited from the activities that caused the contamination long ago, but that it's now time to figure out a way to redress some of those impacts for our community, and so that Portland can be proud of its river. And I guess one of the things that I would suggest is, as you hear more about Portland Harbor and as you gain more of an interest and insight into Portland Harbor, continue to talk about this with your friends, with your colleagues, with your community members, and others who will listen, because I remain convinced that this is going to be one of the largest public policy issues in our region that no one is going to know very much about. We're looking at costs that range anywhere from $1 to $3 billion, and that's a large investment. Not the port specifically, but the region itself is looking at costs between $1 and $3 billion, and that's a large investment in a project that receives very little attention from the community, and that very few people understand. So I think all of you have an opportunity to share more information about this, and we're certainly happy to provide you with information, talking points, maps, charts, whatever you need to help facilitate those conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. That would be great. The talking points and the maps in particular would be quite helpful. Perhaps we could have those sent to us.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'll ask if any commissioner wants a presentation on the consent items, and I can read them if, when I'm done with the list. If you need a presentation or have questions, let me know. They are amendment to land exchange agreement with Metro, Smith and Bayou Lakes and Government Island, Microsoft Enterprise Software Agreement, procurement contract Anchor Scows Navigation Division, and equipment procurement contract Caterpillar Bulldozer Navigation Division. So any questions or? Okay. Hearing none, I'll call for a motion and second for approval of the consent items.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. I'll call on Vince Granado to introduce the first agenda item, please.
I'll just do my intro from here. This first one is for control tower renovation and another building out at Troutdale Airport that both need some roofing services. Both these buildings we've owned since 1960 or were built in 1960 and need some renovation. Thought it would be good to have Steve Nagy, our general aviation manager, talk a little bit about the GA system and specifically about Troutdale. We don't often do a lot at Troutdale, and so we thought it might be good to just talk a little bit about it. Troutdale's a little different for us because we own a lot of the buildings. And so normally we're just we own the land and we lease the buildings, but at Troutdale we own quite a bit. So I thought Steve would be useful to talk a little bit about an overall airport update, and then Ben on from engineering will talk about the actual work in the contract.
Good morning. A brief update on where we stand on Troutdale Airport, and I will start with this. A view of our airport looking from the west, or from the east looking west. Troutdale is a one-runway airport with two main taxiways and development on both, on the right side of the photo on the north, and on the south, less development. As Vince mentioned, Troutdale Airport is a mix of facilities that the port has either built ourselves, the terminal building, our maintenance facility, the airport control tower, and other facilities that were privately built that have reverted back to the port after the termination of their 30-plus-year leases. We completed a master plan. Let me see if I can. We completed a master plan in 2016 that looked at what would be the highest and best uses for the airport going forward in the future. And historically, Troutdale has been an airport that's been used for most smaller general aviation activities, recreational, flight training, some business aviation, but on the smaller end, turboprops and very small and light business jets. And it has a runway that was constructed for kind of over-constructed for the uses at the time. So we wanted to look at it with that master plan and say what was the highest and best uses for the airport going forward. What came out of that 2-year planning process was a reconfiguration of the runway from its current length of a little over 5,000 feet to a runway of about 4,500 feet, narrowing the runway from its current width, which is over the design size for the types of aircraft that are there. We completed that process in 2016. It took us another year plus to get the FAA approval of that final document. So we received that in 2017. As part of that design, or that master plan process, one of the things that we identified was not only the runway reconfiguration, but the uses at the airport could be configured to be more centrally located. And we looked at that and said, let's put the aviation uses on the south side of the airfield, and that would free up approximately 80 to 100 acres of other land for industrial uses at the airport. That helps the overall bottom line of the airport. We would not sell that property, but we would have it on long-term leases. That land is adjacent also to the Troutdale Reynolds Industrial Park, and so there might be some synergies in marketing those two types of properties. So we finally got approval from the FAA in 2017 for this plan that shows that long-term development of moving of uses, aviation uses to the south side, development of the north side for non-aviation industrial uses, and reconfiguration of the runway to a more appropriate length and size for the class of aircraft that use it. We started in 2018 and completed a Southside development study. What would that look like if we developed on the south side? How would we put all those uses together on that land that we own, including aviation reserves for long-term beyond the 30-year planning window? Once we completed that, we engage the FAA. One of the things that we need to do is comply with the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and so we are in the process right now that we started for an environmental assessment that would look at the reconfiguration of the runway and the size and shape for 4,500 feet and for these future developments on the south side. We are about halfway through that process now and hope to complete that next year. We are then, as this slide shows, we are planned with FAA to reconstruct the runway to its new length and new configuration in 2022, excuse me. That would mean accepting federal grants at that time and the port participation in that process. So kind of completing again these next steps of what we're doing. We'll complete the environmental assessment, gain the FAA's approval for reconstruction of the runway and the south side aviation developments. It would allow us, as tenant leases expire on the north side, allow them to relocate to the south side, as well as any new development to occur on the south side. We continue to work with our tenants to accommodate those uses. We're not moving anybody early. We're not planning any of those types of things. Those leases go through the middle part of the next, most of them go through the middle part of the next decade, and then as they complete, we would be relocating them. We want to work with the tenants. Obviously, there'll be operational impacts, disruptions when we close that runway. So we'll be working with them very similar to what we established. We'll have to have some type of program we just completed with Hillsborough. And we're continuing to market the airport. We have an agreement with the city and the other surrounding jurisdictions to help us with that, marketing the airport, to actually have them some participation in the development of the airport. Not financially, but have a stake in helping us market and develop those aviation uses at the airport. So just wanted to give you an update prior to Ben's presentation here about some of the assets that we are currently own and will be revitalizing with this project. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer as well.
Morning, my name is Ben On. I'm from Manisi Group, Inc., and I'm working in a temporary capacity as an engineering project manager for the port. I'm here today to present this item. I'm here to request approval of a construction contract to ASA Construction LLC for the Troutdale Control Tower renovation and Building 1123 roofing rehabilitation project in the approximate amount of $627,000. The control tower is on the north end of the runway here, and the Building 1123 is on the opposite end of the runway on the south side. The control tower will be receiving new roofing and upgrades to the fall protection around the control tower, and building 1123 will be receiving new PVC overlay roof. The design was completed in the first quarter of 2019, and with your approval, we'd like to finish construction before the end of this year. The construction contract will be for $627,000. Our contingency represents 12% of project costs, and funding source is the Port Cost Center. Our small business goal was set at 7%, and the contractor proposed an 18% participation. Staff requests approval of the Executive Director's recommendation.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Hearing none, I'll call for motion and second to approve the Executive Director's recommendation.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vince.
Okay, I have Chris Edwards with me for the next two items. The first one is at Hillsborough, and we've been reconstructing the main runway at Hillsborough since June of this year. The intention was that we would come back next year and do the southern portion of it. It's been a pretty robust and disruptive program, but we've relocated many of the tenants here to PDX, and overall, the project has been going well. In fact, it's been going so well that there's enough time in the schedule to actually take on the southern portion of the project that we were going to do next year. So we're able to do the entire runway this year and really minimize the impact. So we're here to request an amendment with Kodiak to allow them to finish the southern portion of the work and get in, get out, and get the tenants back to Hillsborough and be done with their disruption. So I'll let Chris go through the details of that.
All right, thanks, Vince. Good morning. Today I'm requesting approval toward a contract amendment.
Sorry, this one's Taxiway K. I thought we were doing
Whoops, so
Hillsborough
sorry.
first.
I didn't even pay attention. Okay. Can you switch to Taxiway K, please? Or Hillsborough, excuse me.
We did receive the materials, so
Okay.
if you want to
We'll
go
just
ahead
go
without
through
the
it.
slides, we're okay.
You bet. So today I'm requesting approval to award a contract amendment to Kodiak Pacific for the runway 13 right, 31 left rehabilitation project amount of a little over $900,000. So as Vince mentioned, phase 1 and 2 is currently under construction, and it has required a full runway shutdown. The southern section was shown to the slide was shown in orange, and it was going to be constructed next year, and it also would require another runway shutdown. Kodiak's been making good progress and performing as such. We saw this opportunity to advance that work to this year and basically get everything done and not avoid another runway shutdown. As such, the work that would be before you today is to do a mill inlay and an overlay. Okay, thank you. So this shows the overall contract amendment schedule. The item pulled on your left is the action item before you today. The construction of this work will be completed under the same timeline as the current project, which is the end of September this year. Here is Kodiak's current contract, which was awarded in June's commission of last year, the amendment before you today. There have been no change orders to date. It is funded out of our Port Cost Center, and the disadvantaged business goal of 8% will remain unchanged with this work. Staff requests approval of the Executive Director's recommendation.
Thank you. Just on the 8%, so the 8% now applies to the full contract is what you mean?
Correct.
The small business participation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of schedule, you're moving it forward. Does it extend the closure that we were expecting for this year?
It does not. Okay. So because they were making such good progress and they were a little ahead of schedule, we could fit in this work and still meet the September 27th timeline.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Please.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to disclose my relationship overseeing Nike's flight operations, and they are a tenant of the ports at Hillsborough. And I'm saying this, I don't believe it's a conflict, but I wanted to disclose the relationship and then ask a question about, does advancing this mean that we are foregoing federal funding from the FAA that would be available next year? I mean, did we spread it out as a way to get the funding on a year-to-year basis, or is this just a great opportunity to accelerate at the same cost?
This particular work was not funded by the FAA, so it was fully out of the Port Cost Center, so we're not foregoing any additional funds.
Okay,
doing
thank you.
this.
Any other questions or comments?
This is Commissioner McDonald, and again, I'd like to remind everyone that I am an employee of Intel, and obviously we operate our air shuttle service out of there. The airport's not under my range of responsibilities, and I would like to commend the project team for the rapid completion, and I commend you also for taking advantage of the remaining time to pull in next year's work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. If there are no other questions, I'll call for motion and second to approve the Executive Director's recommendation. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. Vince, do you have the last item for us as well?
All right, now we'll do taxiway K, an amendment to this. And so we have a contractor out there today working on that, but part of that we also had done a survey of the north runway and found some cracking down the center line. We're concerned about that potentially creating some what we call foreign object debris that obviously is not good for aircraft. So we would like to go in and fix that this year. The issue is that it'll be very, very complicated to get in and close that runway here over the next few years, given the complexity of the construction that we'll be having going on with T-Core. So for example, we'll be assembling a lot of things across the field and transporting them across the crosswind runway. You shut that one down, if the other one's down, you're down to a one runway system, and we don't want to do that. So we'd really like to take advantage of the opportunity today with the contractor on Taxiway K, have them get in there, take care of that problem while we have the full runways available to us, and kind of get that one buttoned up before things get much more complicated around the terminal core construction. So Chris will present a request to amend the contract for the Taxiway K.
Great. So this requests approval to do another amendment to Tapani for the Taxiway K project, the amount of a little over $900,000. This shows the overall project location at PDX. This is our north airfield. The Taxiway K work that's going on currently is shown in green. The proposed amendment on the north runway is shown there in red. So as Vince mentioned, we did an analysis earlier this year of the runway and found there was a pretty extensive amount of cracking down that center line of the runway. And we need to address those deficiencies in order to avoid any foreign object debris being developed. As such, the amendment before you today does an 8-foot wide milling inlay down the center line of our runway. This is the overall amendment. Again, the action item before you is bolded, and this work will be completed along with the Taxiway K's contract timeline, which is early October of this year. Tapani's contract was awarded in February's commission of this year. There's an amendment before you. We've had about $44,000 in change orders to date. This is funded out of our airline cost center, and the disadvantaged business enterprise goal of 12% for the overall contract remains unchanged. Staff requests approval of the executive director's recommendation.
Thank you. I just have a safety question. You mentioned that there are safety concerns here, and this is why we're doing the work. Are there concerns about the time between now and when we complete construction here, and how are we dealing with that?
Yeah, our airport operations specialists are constantly monitoring the pavement, and so they're always out looking to see if there's anything that could be a cause for concern. We think the pavement is fine, until we get to that point, but it's really more preventative to make sure things don't get really bad, because we wouldn't be able to really get in and close this runway for 5 years. So there's daily inspections, all of that goes on all the time. But it's really more how bad it could get if we didn't do it now. And so now is really the right time to get in and get it done.
And this remediation will last at least that 5-year period that you need?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, I'll call for a motion in second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Motion carries. And meeting adjourned.